Hello, today I'll be colouring up Stamping Bella's Blanche the butterfly. First I colour up the entire surface areas of the face and arms with my E000 to make the paper a little bit moist before the blending starts. Then I outline the left side and the part underneath the fringe as well as slightly underneath her chin with E15. I repeat the process and blend it slightly outwards with my E13, and then I do the same with my E02. Always covering slightly larger areas. I then use my E00 before I cover the last bit with E000. For colouring the arms, I add slight lines with the darkest marker, the E15, to make the fingers look a little bit longer, add a little bit of a wrist and a bit of a shadow underneath her face and so on, mostly where you find there might be natural shadows. Then this is blended outward slightly with the E13. As before, you just repeat the process, blending outward, then with E02, before you do the same with E00. Finally, you just go over the entire image again with the E000. We do the same with the legs, where we first use the lightest marker to make the paper a little bit wet, before we do the low lights with E15. I leave a slight line on the very left of her leg, so that it gets a slightly more rounded off effect. As before, we blend it out with E13, move over to E02, then we use E00 before we colour it all up with E000. For the hair, we'll start with the darkest marker, which is the E37. We'll make an outline around the hairline underneath the flowers to create a bit of shadow. And then we make some strands of hair go out from there and up from the bottom, so we get the fringe and everything in place. Then we go over those areas and slightly outwards with E34. And then finally we colour up the remaining areas with E31. We'll do a similar approach to the top of her hair. As there are loads of guiding lines already in the stamped image, we'll go around those with the E37, as well as around the flowers to create the shadowed area. This is then blended outwards with the E34. Don't blend it too well, because you do want to see the separate strokes as well. Finally, we go over the entire area with the E31 as the lightest colour. I'm now going to colour up the dress in greens and oranges. I start with the darkest marker, the G99, I then blend this outwards slightly with my YG67 before I go over the remaining areas with my YG63. As I want this colour to be on the lower parts of her dress, I make sure that I also create a shadowed area from the upper parts, so that it looks like it's naturally layered. As the areas are quite small and I've decided to colour them up in a little bit of a fiddly way, I only do 1 or 2 sections at a time, always starting with the G99 and going over it slightly with the YG67, then if it is a smaller area, I will cover up most of that with the YG63, and with the larger areas I will make sure that I leave a little bit of a gap to have an even lighter marker, the YG61. This is to get a little bit more contrast in. Sometimes if you're a little bit unsure where you want the folds, you can always start off with one of the lighter markers and create the outline. If you're happy with where the lines are, you just go over it again with the darkest marker. This will leave a little bit of room for error, and if you want to change your mind, it's far easier to do that if you've made the outline with a light colour marker instead of if you start straight off with the dark one. It's obviously not necessary to create quite as many folds here as I have done. Just do whatever you are comfortable with, but try to make sure that you at least shade it so that you get the shadows in and a bit of highlights where it's likely that the light will hit. On an image like this, it might be an idea to look at it a few times before you start colouring so that you know which areas you want in which colour, so you don't end up getting an area in the wrong colour from what you had originally envisioned. I've decided to make a bit of a lacy bit at the top using a very dark marker and adding small dots with my Jelly Roll white pen. The belt here is also coloured with green. First, obviously, the G99 with slightly longer lines made with the YG67 follows suit with the YG63, and then the few areas that are left you colour with the YG61. For the orange part of this dress, I've started with my E07 for the deepest colours for the folds. This is then blended outwards slightly with YR04. Then the majority of the areas left are coloured with the YR02, and only the highlights are then coloured with the lightest marker, the YR00. This is basically the process that will be repeated on all the areas that are left of her dress. Try to make sure that when you do colour up these folds that you don't make the lines the same length. That will look a bit unnatural unless you do them all the way up from the start. I was a little bit undecided on what colour I wanted for the last one of these, so I waited until I'd coloured up the rest before I decided. And I then decided that I wanted it in the green colours rather than the orange. It's obviously up to you, whatever you feel like colouring it as. For the chest part, I've left a slight gap on the left side, again for a more rounded off effect, while making the outline on the left, with the light source coming from the right, with the E07. This is then blended out with the YR04, YR02, and then the Y00. I then go over and create dots in a colour one shade darker than the area was coloured in. So the YR04 areas would have the dots in E07 and so on. Then to add a little bit of more sparkle to it, I went over it all with the jelly roll and made small white dots. Just quickly doing the shoes in green using the same markers that I used on the dress. I've decided to start by making the outer part of the wings in yellow. I create an outline around the part of the wings with the Y38. Then I colour in the innermost parts of the wings with first the low light from the same marker. Then I go over all of this with my Y17, blending outwards slightly. Before doing the same with the Y13, leaving a little bit of a gap for the lighter colour for contrast. This lighter colour is coloured up with the Y11. I repeat this process on the wings on the other side of the image as well. The reason I'm only doing one side at a time is that I don't want the markers to have time to dry in between me changing the colours for the blending. They won't blend as nicely if the area is already dry. If it is a little bit wet, it is easier to blend a darker marker over into the lighter coloured. If it is still a bit wet, the colours will blend together much nicer. I've decided that the remaining colour of the wings is going to be green also, although this time I'm using a slightly different combination and making it lighter than what I did for the dress. So I start with the YG63, blend it over into the G21, leaving a little bit of a gap for the lightest marker, which in this case is going to be the G40. As there are quite a few sections here and I don't want them to dry up, I split the image into a few different areas so that I only do parts of it at a time. How many you do really depends on how fast you colour, how much you have time for at the time, and generally a bit of experience with how quickly things dry off. Once again, the outline is with the YG63 and the main coloured area is the G21. The small highlighted areas that are left is coloured with the G40. I'm going to make the flowers yellow, so I start with the darkest area of the flower where I want the shadows, and I colour it up with the Y38. Then I go over most of the remaining parts with the YR00. I then create a little bit more contrast with the YR02, and then, as I wasn't quite happy with the darkest areas, I've gone over these with the YR04. Then I create the dots in the middle of the flowers with the E37, and then for a slightly highlighted area I make some dots with the jelly roll again. Just to make sure that the butterfly is grounded, I've used my W markers and quickly created a shadowed area going out from underneath her feet, slightly behind her. And that's it. Thank you all for watching.